Life has a strange way of bringing people together. For Sarah and me, it was the shared weight of grief that intertwined our lives. When Sarah's mother passed away, it was as if her entire world had crumbled. I remember the look on her face when she got the call, eyes wide with shock, mouth slightly open as if she couldn't quite believe the words she was hearing. It was a look I knew all too well. I had lost my father a year earlier. He had been my rock, my guide, and losing him left a gaping hole in my life. Navigating through the fog of grief was the hardest thing I had ever done, and seeing Sarah in that same fog brought back all those raw emotions. I knew what it felt like to have the ground ripped out from under you, to feel like you were free-falling with no end in sight. That shared pain became the foundation of our relationship. We met at a grief counseling group. Neither of us wanted to be there, but both of us needed to be. The first time I saw her, she was sitting at the edge of the group, eyes red and puffy, clutching a crumpled tissue. There was a quiet strength about her, a resolve to get through the pain. I admired that. During the sessions, we spoke about our losses, but it was during the breaks that we really connected. We'd sit together, sharing stories about our parents, laughing at old memories, and crying over the new ones we wouldn't get to make. Those moments brought us closer than anything else could. Sarah was an artist, a graphic designer by trade, but her true passion lay in her personal art. She had a way of capturing emotions on canvas that left you breathless. Her studio apartment was filled with paintings, vibrant colors that seemed to pulse with life and raw sketches that bared her soul. I was a lawyer, used to the rigid structure of laws and contracts, but her art introduced me to a world where emotions flowed freely and boundaries were blurred. Our relationship blossomed quickly. It was like finding a kindred spirit in the midst of a storm. We leaned on each other, finding solace in our shared experiences. We had our inside jokes, our little rituals. Every Friday night, we'd cook dinner together, a tradition we started after a particularly grueling counseling session. We'd pick a recipe, shop for ingredients, and spend the evening cooking, talking, and laughing. Those simple, happy moments were a stark contrast to the grief that had brought us together, and they became the highlights of my week. One evening stands out more than the others. It was a cold winter night, and we had decided to make a hearty beef stew. We were in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and sipping on red wine. The radio was playing softly in the background, and the whole apartment smelled of rosemary and thyme. We were laughing about something, probably my poor knife skills, when she suddenly stopped and looked at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you, Michael," she said softly, "for everything. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." Her words hit me hard. I felt the same way. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah. We're in this together." She reached out and took my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "Yes, we are." That night, we sat down to eat our stew, and it tasted like the best meal I had ever had. It wasn't just the food. It was the sense of togetherness, the feeling that we had found a way to turn our pain into something beautiful. After dinner, we curled up on the couch with a blanket and watched a movie, her head resting on my shoulder. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. Our connection deepened with each passing day. We understood each other's pain in a way no one else could. We had both been through hell and come out on the other side, not unscathed, but stronger. Sarah's laughter, her smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about something she loved, all these things became the anchors in my life. But it wasn't just about the grief. We discovered new things together, went on adventures, made new memories. There was the spontaneous road trip to the countryside where we ended up getting lost and spent the night under the stars, talking about our dreams and fears. There were lazy Sundays spent in pajamas, binge-watching our favorite shows and eating takeout. Every moment with Sarah felt like a gift. Despite the darkness that had brought us together, our life together was filled with light. We had our ups and downs, like any couple, but we always found our way back to each other. Our bond felt unbreakable, forged in the crucible of shared sorrow and strengthened by the joy we found in each other. Looking back, those years with Sarah were some of the best of my life. I had found not just a partner, but a soulmate. Someone who understood me in ways no one else ever could. Someone who made me believe in love again, even in the midst of pain. And that was why, when everything came crashing down, It hurt more than I could have ever imagined. Life can be unpredictable, indeed. And sometimes, the very thing that brings you the most joy can also bring the deepest pain. But at that moment, with Sarah by my side, I believed we could face anything together. Little did I know how wrong I was. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm with Sarah. Our Friday night dinners, lazy weekends, and spontaneous adventures painted a picture of a perfect relationship. Or so I thought. One evening, I was sitting on our couch, browsing through my social media feed while Sarah was out with friends. I stumbled upon a post from Jack, an old college buddy who had recently moved back to New York. He was throwing a surprise party for his girlfriend and had tagged everyone who was coming. Out of curiosity, I clicked through the photos from past events he had shared. As I scrolled, one photo caught my eye. Sarah, laughing and holding a drink, her arm wrapped around a man I didn't recognize. They looked a bit too close for comfort. I tried to brush it off. Sarah had mentioned she'd be catching up with friends from work, and I trusted her. But something about that photo gnawed at me. It wasn't jealousy. I had never been the jealous type, but a sense of something being off. A few days later, Sarah left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was in the shower. A message notification popped up. It was from someone named Mark. Curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced at the screen. The message read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My heart sank. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. This couldn't be what it looked like. Maybe it was a misunderstanding, a joke, anything but what my gut was telling me. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I needed to know more. That night, after Sarah had fallen asleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with possibilities. I decided to investigate further. I knew her phone's password. We had shared them early in our relationship, a gesture of trust that now felt bitterly ironic. With trembling hands, I unlocked her phone and started going through her messages. What I found shattered my world. There were dozens of messages between Sarah and Mark, detailing a relationship that had been going on for months. The texts were explicit, filled with plans for secret meetings and expressions of affection that made my stomach churn. They had been meeting regularly, often when she had told me she was working late or out with friends. I felt a rage building inside me, a mix of betrayal and heartbreak. How could she do this to me? To us? I wanted to wake her up, to confront her right then and there, but I needed more. I needed to know the full extent of her betrayal. Over the next few days, I played the role of the unsuspecting boyfriend, all the while gathering more evidence. I checked her emails, her social media, anything that might give me a clearer picture. Each new piece of information was like a knife to the heart. Photos of them together, more messages, even a reservation at a hotel for a night. She had claimed to be out of town for a work conference. The lies were so intricate, so detailed, that it was clear this wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a full-blown affair. One evening, I decided to confront her. I couldn't keep up the charade any longer. She was in the living room, sketching on her tablet, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. I sat down across from her, my heart pounding. "Sarah, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She looked up, concern flashing in her eyes. "What's wrong, Michael?" I took a deep breath and laid my phone on the table, open to a particularly damning exchange between her and Mark. "Explain this." Her face went pale. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it, but then she just sighed and put her tablet down. "Michael, how long has this been going on?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "How long have you been lying to me?" "Michael, please, let me explain," she pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes. I stood up, unable to contain my anger any longer. "Explain? You've been cheating on me for months, Sarah. I trusted you. I loved you. How could you do this?" She started to cry, but I couldn't find any sympathy in my heart. "It just happened," she said through her sobs. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was confused, and Mark was there for me." "Confused?" I scoffed. "That's your excuse? You were confused, so you decided to betray the person who stood by you through everything?" Her tears turned to anger. "It's not that simple, Michael. You've been so absorbed in your work, in your own world. I felt lonely, neglected. Her words stung because there was a grain of truth in them. I had been working long hours, trying to make partner at my law firm, but I never thought it would drive her into someone else's arms. So this is my fault now? I shot back. You couldn't talk to me, so you just decided to cheat? I made a mistake, she said quietly. A terrible mistake. But it's not all black and white. I stared at her, the woman I had shared my life with, and felt like I was looking at a stranger. I can't do this, I said finally. I need you to leave. Michael, please, let's talk about this. We can work through it, she begged. But there was no working through it. The trust was shattered, and I couldn't see a way to piece it back together.
No, Sarah.
I need you to go. She packed a bag and left that night, her sobs echoing in the hallway as she walked out of our apartment. As the door closed behind her, I felt a wave of numbness wash over me. The life we had built together was in ruins, and all I could think about was the depth of her betrayal. Sitting alone in our apartment, I realized that the grief I had once shared with Sarah had returned, but this time it was mixed with a seething rage. I knew I couldn't just let this go. She had to face the consequences of her actions, and I was going to make sure she did. The days after Sarah left were a blur of anger and sadness. Our apartment, once filled with laughter and the comforting presence of a shared life, now felt empty and cold. I wandered through each room, memories flooding back with every step. Her scent still lingered on the sheets, her favorite mug was still on the kitchen counter, and her art supplies were scattered around the living room. Each reminder was a fresh wound. But amid the sorrow, a steely resolve began to form. I couldn't just let her betrayal go unanswered. As a lawyer, I knew the importance of evidence and planning. But I also had a hidden talent, one that most people didn't know about. I was an amateur detective. It started as a hobby, a way to pass the time and satisfy my curiosity. I loved solving puzzles, uncovering secrets, and piecing together the truth. Now, this talent would serve a different purpose. I began my investigation with the information I already had. Sarah's messages with Mark were explicit and detailed, but I needed more. I needed to understand the full extent of their relationship and the betrayal. I started by digging into Mark's background. He was a software developer, working for a startup in the city. His social media profiles were public, and I scoured them for any useful information. Mark had a penchant for sharing his life online. There were photos of him at various tech events, posts about his projects, and most importantly, check-ins at locations around the city. I created a timeline of his activities, cross-referencing them with the messages between him and Sarah. Patterns began to emerge. There were regular meetups at a cafe near his office, dinners at upscale restaurants, and weekends spent at a cabin upstate. As I delved deeper, I discovered that Mark wasn't just a casual fling for Sarah. He was someone she had invested time and emotions in, someone she had lied to me about repeatedly. This realization fueled my determination to expose them both. I decided to use my legal expertise and detective skills to build an airtight case against them. First, I needed more evidence. I set up a meeting with an old friend from law school, Amanda, who now worked as a private investigator. We met at a quiet bar downtown, and I laid out the situation for her. Amanda listened intently, her expression serious. "You want to expose them," she said, tapping her fingers on the table. "But to what end, Michael? What's your ultimate goal here?" "I want them to face the consequences of their actions," I replied. "Sarah betrayed me, and Mark knowingly participated. I need to show them that their actions have repercussions." Amanda nodded. "I understand. I'll help you. But you need to be prepared for the fallout. This could get messy." "I know," I said, determination hardening my resolve. "I'm ready." Amanda and I devised a plan. She would follow Sarah and Mark, documenting their meetings and gathering evidence of their affair. In the meantime, I would use my legal resources to dig into their professional lives. I needed to find leverage, something that would make them feel the sting of betrayal just as I had. Days turned into weeks as Amanda and I worked together. She provided me with photos and videos of Sarah and Mark together, proof that their relationship was ongoing. I used my connections to access information about Mark's company, discovering that he had been using company resources for personal projects, a clear violation of his employment contract. With this information, I was ready to move to the next phase of my plan. One evening, Amanda called me with an urgent update. "Michael, you need to see this," she said. "I've got something that could be a game changer." We met at a small cafe, and she handed me a folder. Inside were documents showing that Mark had been embezzling funds from his company. It was the leverage I needed. With this information, I could ensure that both Sarah and Mark faced serious consequences. Armed with the evidence, I crafted a strategy to expose them. I decided to use social media to my advantage, creating an anonymous account to leak the information. I started with the photos and videos, posting them with cryptic captions that hinted at their betrayal. The posts quickly gained traction, shared and commented on by hundreds of people. Next, I leaked the documents about Mark's embezzlement. The reaction was swift and brutal. His company launched an internal investigation, and within days, Mark was fired and facing potential legal action. Sarah's professional reputation also took a hit as her involvement with Mark became public knowledge. She lost clients and faced scrutiny from her peers. Throughout this process, I struggled with my emotions. The satisfaction of seeing them face consequences was tempered by the lingering pain of betrayal. But I knew this was the only way I could find closure. I couldn't let their actions go unpunished. In the end, the fallout was severe. Mark's career was in shambles, and he faced legal battles that would haunt him for years. Sarah, once a respected artist, found herself ostracized by her community. Our friends, shocked by the revelations, distanced themselves from her. She tried to reach out to me, begging for forgiveness, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. The damage was done, and there was no going back. As I stood in our now empty apartment, I felt a sense of finality. The betrayal had been exposed, and justice had been served. It was time to move on, to start a new chapter in my life. I packed my bags and left the apartment, ready to face whatever the future held. In the end, I realized that revenge had its costs, but it also brought a sense of closure. I had used my hidden talent to uncover the truth, and in doing so, I had reclaimed my sense of self. The journey had been painful, but it had also been necessary. And now, as I walked away from the past, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. The days after uncovering Sarah's betrayal were filled with a kind of silent rage that simmered just beneath the surface. I was like a volcano, waiting to erupt. Each night, I would lie awake, thinking about all the lies, the deceit, and the trust that had been shattered. The evidence I had gathered with Amanda's help was irrefutable, and now it was time to confront Sarah. I chose a Saturday evening for the confrontation. Sarah had planned to go out with some friends, but I asked her to stay in, saying we needed to talk. She seemed concerned, sensing the gravity in my voice, and agreed. We sat in the living room, the same place where we had shared so many happy moments, now overshadowed by the impending storm. "Michael, what's this about?" she asked, her voice tinged with worry. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly as I held my phone. "Sarah, I know about you and Mark." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "What are you talking about?" I unlocked my phone and opened the messages, handing it to her. "Read these." She took the phone, her hands shaking as she scrolled through the messages. I watched her face, seeing the color drain away as she realized the extent of what I knew. When she looked up at me, tears were already welling in her eyes. "Michael, don't," I interrupted, my voice cold and hard. "Just don't. How long has this been going on?" She swallowed hard, tears spilling down her cheeks. "A few months," she whispered. "It just happened. I didn't mean for it to go this far." I laughed bitterly. "It just happened? You didn't mean for it to go this far? Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds, Sarah? You lied to me, over and over. You betrayed me." Her tears fell freely now, but I felt no sympathy. "I was lonely, Michael. You were always working late, always too busy with your cases. I needed someone, and Mark was there." The rage bubbled up inside me. "So this is my fault? You're blaming me for your cheating?" "No, that's not what I'm saying," she said quickly, shaking her head. "I'm not trying to justify what I did. I made a terrible mistake. But you have to understand, I felt so neglected." "Neglected?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I was working hard to build a future for us, Sarah. Everything I did was for us. And you repay me by sleeping with someone else? She sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I'm so sorry, Michael. I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed everything we had. But please, we can work through this. I'll do anything to make it right. I stood up, pacing the room. The anger and hurt were too overwhelming. How can we ever make this right, Sarah? How can I ever trust you again? Every time you said you were working late or out with friends, you were with him, weren't you? She nodded, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Yes, she admitted. I was with him. I felt a pang of heartbreak amidst the anger. This was the woman I had shared my life with, the woman I had supported through her darkest times. And now, she had become a stranger to me. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this, I said quietly. Please, Michael, she pleaded, reaching out to touch my arm. I love you. I still love you. We can get past this. We can go to counseling. We can work it out. I pulled away from her touch, shaking my head. Love? How can you say you love me after what you've done? Love isn't just words, Sarah. It's actions. And your actions have shown me that you don't love me. She sobbed harder, her desperation palpable. I do love you. I know I made a horrible mistake, but please don't give up on us. I turned away, unable to look at her. The memories of our time together flashed through my mind. Our laughter, our shared grief, our dreams for the future. It all felt like a cruel joke now. I need you to leave, I said finally, my voice breaking. I can't do this anymore. Michael, please, she begged. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. I'm not the one who threw it away, I replied, my tone final. You did. Now, please, just go. She stood there for a moment, her face crumpled in anguish. Then, without another word, she turned and walked towards the bedroom to pack a bag. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, feeling the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. When she came back out, carrying a small suitcase, she stopped in front of me. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I never meant to hurt you. I looked up at her, my heart aching. You already did. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and walked to the door. As it closed behind her, I felt a profound emptiness settle over me. The life we had built together was in ruins, and I was left alone to pick up the pieces. The next few days were a haze of anger, sadness, and disbelief. I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the pain. But every quiet moment was filled with thoughts of Sarah and Mark and the betrayal that had shattered my world. I knew I couldn't let it go. I had to do something, not just for myself, but to make sure they faced the consequences of their actions. The anger gave me a sense of purpose, a reason to push forward. I would expose them, make them pay for the hurt they had caused. It was the only way I could find some semblance of peace. And so, with a heavy heart and a mind set on retribution, I began to plan my next move. The days following the confrontation with Sarah were some of the darkest I had ever experienced. The apartment felt like a tomb, filled with echoes of our past life together. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional sound of the city outside. Each memory of our shared moments now felt like a painful reminder of her betrayal. But amidst the sorrow, a cold, calculating resolve began to take shape. I knew I couldn't just let this go. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of my home office, I began to outline my plan. The lawyer in me craved justice, and the amateur detective in me thirsted for retribution. I was going to expose Sarah and Mark for who they truly were. They had to face the consequences of their actions, and I was determined to ensure that they did. I started by gathering all the evidence I had collected. The text messages, emails, and photos Amanda had provided were crucial. They painted a clear picture of the affair, showing the extent of their deceit. But I needed more. I needed something that would hit them where it hurt the most, their reputations and their careers. Mark was a software developer at a well-known tech startup, a company that prided itself on integrity and innovation. His involvement in an affair, coupled with the embezzlement Amanda had uncovered, would be more than enough to ruin him professionally. I began to compile a detailed report, organizing the evidence in a way that would be irrefutable. For Sarah, the stakes were different. She was a respected graphic designer with a growing portfolio and a network of clients who valued her creativity and professionalism. An affair might not destroy her career entirely, but it would certainly tarnish her reputation. I decided to target the trust her clients and colleagues had in her. I started drafting anonymous emails and social media posts that would subtly leak the information, hinting at her unprofessional conduct and the scandalous nature of her personal life. The next step was to create a timeline for the exposure. Timing was crucial. I needed to ensure that the information came out in a way that maximized the impact. I planned to start with Mark's company, knowing that corporate scandals had a way of snowballing quickly. Once the fallout began, I would release the information about Sarah, ensuring that the two scandals were linked in the public eye. As I worked late into the night, meticulously planning each step, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. They had betrayed me, and they deserved to face the consequences. But as I plotted my course, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered doubts. Was this really the right thing to do? Was I sinking to their level by orchestrating this elaborate revenge? I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the task at hand. I had come too far to turn back now. The plan was in motion, and there was no stopping it. A few days later, I met with Amanda again. We sat in a quiet corner of the same bar where we had first discussed the plan. She listened as I laid out the details, nodding thoughtfully. "Are you sure about this, Michael?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "Once this starts, there's no going back." "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "They need to be held accountable for what they've done." Amanda sighed, but she didn't argue. She had seen the evidence, knew the depth of the betrayal. "All right," she said. "I'll help you. But be prepared for the fallout. This is going to get messy." "I know," I said. "I'm ready." We finalized the details, and I felt a surge of adrenaline. The plan was set. All that was left was to execute it. The first phase of the plan involved sending the report on Mark to his company's HR department. I composed a carefully worded email, attaching the evidence and detailing his misconduct. I used an anonymous email account, ensuring that it couldn't be traced back to me. With a deep breath, I hit send. The next few days were a tense waiting game. I monitored the company's internal communications, using some contacts I had within the tech industry. It didn't take long for the bomb to drop. Mark was called into a meeting, and the investigation began. Word spread quickly, and soon the entire company was buzzing with the scandal. Mark was suspended pending further investigation, and his reputation took a nosedive. With the first part of the plan in motion, I turned my attention to Sarah. I started by creating a series of anonymous social media accounts. Using these accounts, I began to leak the information slowly, crafting posts that hinted at her unprofessional behavior and the affair. I also sent anonymous emails to her clients, suggesting that they reconsider their association with her due to the scandal. The reaction was swift. Sarah's phone started ringing off the hook as clients began to pull out of projects and colleagues distanced themselves. The carefully constructed image she had built over the years was crumbling. One evening, as I was reviewing the progress of my plan, I received a call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Michael," a familiar voice said, filled with anger and desperation. It was Mark. "Yes?" I replied, my voice steady. "How could you do this?" he demanded. "You've destroyed everything. My job, my reputation. It's all gone. You should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with my girlfriend," I said coldly. "You don't understand," he said, his voice breaking. "It wasn't just about you. There were other things." "I don't care," I interrupted. "You made your choices, Mark. Now you have to live with the consequences." He was silent for a moment, and then the line went dead. I sat back, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. The plan was working, but at what cost? As the days turned into weeks, the fallout continued. Mark faced legal action from his company, and his career was in tatters. Sarah's professional life was in shambles, and she became a pariah in her social circles. The revenge I had so meticulously planned had succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. But as I sat alone in our apartment, the emptiness returned. The satisfaction of revenge was fleeting, and I was left with the remnants of a life that had been destroyed. I had exposed them, made them pay for their betrayal, but it hadn't brought the peace I had hoped for. In the end, I realized that while justice had been served, it had come at a great personal cost. The plan had consumed me, leaving me hollow and alone. As I looked out at the city lights, I wondered if there was a way to rebuild, to find a new path forward. Only time would tell. The aftermath of my plan left me feeling hollow and alone. I had executed my revenge flawlessly, but the sense of satisfaction was fleeting. The realization that I had sunk to their level gnawed at me. I knew there was no going back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost a part of myself in the process. One evening, as I was drowning my sorrows in a bottle of whiskey, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I ignored it at first, but curiosity got the better of me. I picked up the phone and opened the message. "Michael, it's David. We need to talk." David was Sarah's younger brother. I hadn't spoken to him since the fallout with Sarah. He had always been distant, but I knew he cared for his sister deeply. I hesitated for a moment before responding.
Fine.
"Where and when?" "Meet me at the corner cafe tomorrow at noon." The next day, I walked into the cafe, feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity. David was already there, sitting at a table near the back, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down. "Let's cut to the chase, David. What do you want?" I replied, not in the mood for pleasantries. He sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Look, I know what Sarah did was wrong, and I understand why you did what you did. But there's more to this than you realize." I frowned. "What do you mean?" David leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Sarah has always been a mess emotionally. After our mom died, she never really recovered. She got involved with Mark because he took advantage of her vulnerability. He manipulated her, Michael." I felt a pang of guilt, but I pushed it aside. "That doesn't excuse her actions, David." "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "But it might explain why she did what she did. And there's something else. Mark has a history of doing this. You're not the first person he's targeted." My eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" David pulled out a folder and handed it to me. Inside were documents and photos detailing Mark's past relationships, all of which ended in similar scandals. Mark is a serial manipulator. He finds women who are vulnerable, gets involved with them, and then ruins their lives. Sarah was just his latest victim. I felt a surge of anger and a sick sense of vindication. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "I didn't know until recently," David admitted. "I've been doing some digging of my own. I wanted to make sure I had all the facts before coming to you." I leaned back in my chair, processing this new information. "So, what do you want from me, David?" "I want to help you take him down," David said, his eyes burning with determination. "Not just for what he did to Sarah, but for all the women he's hurt." I studied him for a moment. David had always seemed like a quiet, unassuming guy, but now I saw a fire in him that I hadn't noticed before. "Why do you care so much about this?" "Because Sarah is my sister," he said simply, "and because it's the right thing to do." I nodded slowly. "All right, let's do this." Over the next few weeks, David and I worked together, pooling our resources and skills. David had a knack for finding information that even I couldn't uncover. He had contacts in places I hadn't thought to look, and his determination matched my own. We started by digging deeper into Mark's past. We found more victims, women who had been manipulated and discarded by him. Some of them were hesitant to speak up, but others were eager to share their stories. We compiled everything into a comprehensive dossier, detailing Mark's pattern of behavior. Next, we reached out to the media. David's contacts helped us get in touch with a journalist who specialized in exposing predatory behavior. She was immediately interested in the story and agreed to help us bring it to light. As the story began to take shape, I felt a sense of purpose returning. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Mark needed to be stopped, not just for what he had done to Sarah and me, but for all the lives he had ruined. The article went live, and the response was overwhelming. Mark's past was laid bare for the world to see. His former victims came forward, adding their voices to the growing chorus of condemnation. The tech community, already reeling from his embezzlement scandal, now had even more reason to distance themselves from him. Mark's life unraveled rapidly. He lost his job, his professional reputation, and the respect of his peers. Legal action was taken against him, and he faced a series of lawsuits from his former victims. The fallout was immense, and it was clear that he would never recover from it. Throughout this process, David and I grew closer. He had been an unexpected ally, but his support had been invaluable. We shared a common goal and a deep sense of satisfaction as we watched Mark's downfall. One evening, after the dust had settled, David and I met again at the corner cafe. This time, there was a sense of closure in the air. "We did it," David said, raising his cup of coffee in a toast. "Yeah, we did," I agreed, clinking my cup against his. As we sat there, I realized that my journey for revenge had transformed into something much more meaningful. It had brought justice to those who needed it, and had helped me find a new sense of purpose. The pain of Sarah's betrayal still lingered, but I knew that I was moving forward. With David by my side, I felt ready to face whatever the future held. Together, we had made a difference, and that was something to be proud of. With the plan meticulously crafted and our newfound alliance in place, it was time to put everything into action. The first stage of our strategy had already caused ripples, but what we had planned next was designed to create a tsunami that would irrevocably topple Mark and leave a lasting impact on Sarah. The dossier we had compiled on Mark was now in the hands of a journalist eager to expose him. The anticipation of the impending fallout was almost palpable. On the morning of the article's publication, I woke up with a mixture of nervous energy and grim determination. The journalist, Samantha, had assured us that the piece was thorough, damning, and impossible to ignore. As I sipped my coffee and scrolled through my phone, the notification popped up. The headline was bold and unflinching: "Serial Manipulator Exposed, the Dark Secrets of a Tech Prodigy." Within minutes, the article started gaining traction. It spread across social media like wildfire, shared and commented on by thousands. The victims we had interviewed added their voices, sharing the article and recounting their own experiences with Mark. It was a public outcry of epic proportions. I watched the chaos unfold online, feeling a sense of vindication. Mark's name trended for all the wrong reasons, and the backlash was immediate. His company issued a statement distancing themselves from him, confirming his termination and expressing support for the investigation. The tech community, known for its tight-knit nature, quickly turned on him. Mark's downfall was swift. His face was splashed across news outlets, his reputation dismantled piece by piece. As the day wore on, I received a text from David: "Phase 1 complete. Ready for Phase 2? I replied, "Ready?" Phase 2 involved Sarah. While she wasn't a serial manipulator like Mark, her actions had still caused immense pain, and she needed to face the consequences. We decided to take a more subtle approach, ensuring that her professional and social circles knew about her betrayal without stooping to outright public humiliation. We wanted her to understand the weight of her actions, not destroy her completely. David and I had compiled a list of Sarah's clients, colleagues, and acquaintances. Using the anonymous social media accounts I had created, we began to disseminate information about her affair with Mark. Carefully crafted posts hinted at her unprofessional conduct, her betrayal, and the scandal now linked to her name. The effect was gradual but unmistakable. Within days, Sarah's clients began to withdraw their business. Colleagues who had once admired her now viewed her with suspicion and disappointment. Invitations to social events dried up, and her phone calls went unanswered. Sarah's once thriving career and social life crumbled under the weight of the scandal. Amidst this chaos, I received an unexpected call. It was from one of Sarah's former clients, a prominent art gallery owner named Linda. She had always been fond of Sarah and had offered her numerous opportunities to showcase her work. "Michael, I heard about what happened," Linda said, her voice a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Is it true?" "Yes, Linda, it's true," I replied, my tone somber. "Sarah made some terrible choices, and now she's facing the consequences." "I can't believe it," Linda said, sighing. "She had such talent. It's a shame it came to this." "It is," I agreed. "But actions have consequences, and she needs to learn that." As the days turned into weeks, the full extent of the fallout became apparent. Mark was embroiled in legal battles, facing lawsuits from his former victims and investigations into his embezzlement. His life was in ruins, and there was no hope of redemption for him. Sarah, on the other hand, faced a different kind of punishment. She was ostracized by her peers, her career in tatters, and her once vibrant social life reduced to a shadow of its former self. She tried reaching out to me several times, leaving tearful voicemails and heartfelt apologies, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. The wound was still too fresh. One evening, as I was going through some paperwork in my home office, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from David. "Meet me at the park. We need to talk." Curious and slightly apprehensive, I made my way to the park where David and I had met several times before. He was sitting on a bench, looking thoughtful as he watched the sunset. "What's up?" I asked, sitting down beside him. "I've been thinking," David began, his voice serious. "We've achieved what we set out to do. Mark is done for, and Sarah has faced the consequences of her actions. But where do we go from here?" I sighed, staring at the fading light. "I don't know, David. Part of me feels satisfied, but another part feels empty." David nodded. "Revenge can be a double-edged sword. It gives you a sense of justice, but it also leaves a void. I've been feeling the same way." We sat in silence for a few moments, contemplating our next steps. "Maybe it's time to focus on rebuilding," I said finally. "We've torn down the people who hurt us, but now we need to rebuild ourselves." David smiled faintly. "I think you're right. We can't let this consume us forever." In the days that followed, I took steps to move forward. I threw myself into my work, focusing on cases that allowed me to use my skills for good. I reconnected with friends I had distanced myself from during the turmoil, finding solace in their support. Slowly but surely, I began to heal. One afternoon, as I was packing up my office, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Linda, the art gallery owner. She walked in with a determined look on her face. "Michael, I have a proposal for you," she said. "Linda, what brings you here?" I asked, surprised. "I want to host an exhibition at my gallery," she said. "But not just any exhibition. I want it to be about redemption, healing, and new beginnings. And I want you to be involved." I frowned, unsure of what she meant. "Involved how?" "You have a unique story, Michael. A story of betrayal, justice, and ultimately, healing. I want to feature not just art, but narratives. Your narrative. It could help others going through similar experiences." I was taken aback by her offer. The idea of sharing my story publicly was daunting, but it also felt like a way to find closure. "I'll think about it," I said finally. Linda smiled. "Take your time. Just know that your story could inspire others." As she left, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the next step in my journey, turning my pain into something meaningful. The execution of my plan had brought justice, but it was time to seek something greater. It was time to rebuild, not just my life, but perhaps even help others rebuild theirs. The whirlwind of revenge had left me standing amidst the ruins of what was once my life. Mark and Sarah had faced their reckoning, but now that the dust was settling, I was left alone with my thoughts. The satisfaction I had anticipated was fleeting, replaced by an unshakable emptiness and a gnawing sense of doubt. The execution of my plan had been almost flawless. Mark's professional life was in shambles, and Sarah's social and career circles had cast her out. Yet, as I sat in my apartment, staring out at the city lights, I couldn't help but wonder if I had gone too far. The anger that had driven me now felt like a double-edged sword, cutting deep into my conscience. Nights were the hardest. Sleep was elusive, my mind replaying every step of my revenge, questioning my motives and the morality of my actions. Had I become the very thing I despised? A manipulator, a destroyer? The lines had blurred, and in my quest for justice, I had lost sight of myself. One evening, I found myself at the bar where David and I had met to discuss our plans. I sat in a corner booth, nursing a glass of whiskey. The dim lighting and the low hum of conversation provided a semblance of comfort. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos of Sarah and me. Each image was a reminder of what once was, a life filled with love and happiness, now tainted by betrayal. As I put my phone away, A familiar voice interrupted my thoughts. Mind if I join you? I looked up to see David standing there, a concerned expression on his face. I nodded, and he slid into the booth across from me. You've been quiet lately, he remarked, signaling the bartender for a drink. I shrugged. Just dealing with everything. David studied me for a moment before speaking. You know, it's okay to have doubts. What we did, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't without consequences. I sighed, taking a sip of my drink. I thought I'd feel better, more vindicated. But all I feel is this emptiness, this nagging sense that maybe I went too far. David nodded slowly. Revenge is a tricky thing. It can give you a sense of control, but it can also leave you feeling lost. You wanted justice, and you got it. But now you have to deal with the aftermath. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Did we really achieve anything meaningful, or did we just destroy lives? David leaned back, contemplating my question. We exposed the truth, Michael. Mark needed to be stopped, and Sarah needed to face the consequences of her actions. But that doesn't mean it was easy, or that it was the right choice for everyone involved. His words echoed in my mind as I left the bar that night. I walked through the city streets, the cool night air doing little to clear the fog in my head. My thoughts were a tangled mess of guilt, anger, and doubt. I had always prided myself on my sense of justice, but now I was grappling with the reality of my actions. The next few days were a blur of introspection. I found myself avoiding work, avoiding people, and avoiding my own reflection. I was haunted by the faces of those I had hurt, directly and indirectly. Mark's downfall was necessary, but Sarah's? Had I been too harsh, too blinded by my own pain to see that she was also a victim of circumstances? One morning, I woke up and decided I needed clarity. I needed to understand if there was a way to find redemption, not just for myself, but for those I had hurt. I reached out to Linda, the art gallery owner who had offered me a chance to share my story. Linda, I'd like to take you up on your offer, I said over the phone. I think it's time to turn this pain into something meaningful. Linda was thrilled. I'm glad to hear that, Michael. This exhibition could be a powerful way to help others and maybe even find some healing for yourself. Over the next few weeks, I immersed myself in the project. I wrote my story, laying bare the raw emotions, the anger, the betrayal, and the eventual revenge. It was cathartic, a way to process everything I had been through. I included narratives from Mark's other victims, weaving a tapestry of shared pain and resilience. The exhibition, titled Echoes of Betrayal, opened to a packed gallery. The walls were adorned with art pieces and written stories, each one a testament to the human experience of betrayal and the quest for justice. As I walked through the gallery, I felt a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. This was my story, laid bare for the world to see. Towards the end of the evening, I found myself standing in front of a painting that Sarah had done during our happier times. It was a beautiful, abstract piece filled with vibrant colors and swirling patterns. It captured the essence of our relationship, complicated, intense, and ultimately shattered. Beautiful, isn't it? A voice said beside me. I turned to see Linda, her eyes reflecting the same mix of emotions I felt. Yes, it is, I replied, my voice soft. Art has a way of capturing our deepest emotions, she said. And sometimes, sharing those emotions can be the first step towards healing. I nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. Thank you, Linda, for giving me this opportunity. It's my pleasure, Michael. You've turned your pain into something that can help others. That's a powerful thing. As the night drew to a close, I realized that my internal struggle was far from over, but I had taken the first step towards healing. The exhibition had given me a sense of purpose, a way to channel my emotions into something constructive. I knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a glimmer of hope. Revenge had been my initial goal, but redemption was now within reach. And maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to forgive myself and move forward. The internal struggle would continue, but I was no longer alone in facing it. The days following the exhibition were a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The event had been a cathartic experience, allowing me to pour out my emotions and find some semblance of closure. But as the initial euphoria faded, I was left to face the reality of my actions and their consequences. I had spent so much time and energy on revenge that I had neglected the other aspects of my life. My job at the law firm, which had once been my sanctuary, now felt hollow. I had taken a leave of absence during the chaos, and returning to the office was daunting. I walked into the building one Monday morning, greeted by the familiar hum of activity and the scent of fresh coffee. My colleagues welcomed me back with smiles and nods, but I could sense their curiosity, their unspoken questions about where I had been and what had transpired. My first day back was spent catching up on emails and meeting with clients. As I settled into my routine, I found solace in the structure and predictability of my work. The cases were a distraction, a way to focus my mind and keep the darkness at bay. But even as I buried myself in legal briefs and court filings, the ghosts of my actions lingered in the back of my mind. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I received a call from David. He sounded anxious, his voice strained. "Michael, we need to talk. Can you meet me at the park?" I agreed, sensing the urgency in his tone. When I arrived at the park, David was already there, pacing nervously. He looked up as I approached, his expression troubled. "What's going on?" I asked, concerned. "It's Sarah," he said, running a hand through his hair. "She's in a bad place, Michael. The fallout from everything has hit her hard. She's lost her job, her friends. She's struggling." I felt a pang of guilt, but I tried to push it aside. "She brought this on herself, David. She made her choices." "I know," he replied, his voice softer. "But she's still my sister. And despite everything, she needs help." We sat on a bench, the weight of the conversation heavy between us. "What do you want me to do, David?" I asked, feeling torn. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I thought you should know. Maybe there's a way to help her without compromising what we've done." I nodded slowly, the conflicting emotions swirling inside me. Sarah's betrayal had cut deep, but seeing her suffer was not something I had anticipated. The plan had been about justice, not cruelty. "I'll think about it," I said finally. As I walked home, I couldn't shake the image of Sarah, alone and broken. My mind replayed our confrontation, the look of desperation in her eyes as she begged for forgiveness. I had been so consumed by my own pain that I hadn't considered the full impact of my actions on her. The realization was sobering. Over the next few days, I reached out to Linda. She had become a confidant, someone who understood the complexities of my situation. We met at a small cafe, and I poured out my thoughts to her, seeking her perspective. "Linda, I feel like I'm stuck in this cycle of guilt and anger. The exhibition helped, but now I'm left wondering if I did the right thing." She listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "Michael, it's natural to have doubts. What you did was intense and had serious consequences. But the fact that you're questioning it shows that you have a conscience. I just don't know how to move forward," I admitted. "Part of me wants to reach out to Sarah, to help her somehow. But I don't know if I can or if I should." Linda took a sip of her coffee, considering her response. "Forgiveness is a powerful thing, Michael. It's not about absolving someone of their actions, but about freeing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. Maybe reaching out to Sarah could be a step towards that." Her words resonated with me. Forgiveness had never been part of my plan, but perhaps it was the missing piece I needed to find true closure. I decided to reach out to Sarah, not to reconcile, but to offer a path forward for both of us. I called her one evening, my heart pounding as I waited for her to answer. When she finally did, her voice was wary, tinged with sadness. "Michael, why are you calling?" she asked, clearly surprised. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," I said, choosing my words carefully. "And I realized that holding on to this anger isn't helping either of us. I wanted to see if we could find a way to move past it, to find some kind of closure." There was a long pause before she spoke. "I don't know if that's possible, but I'm willing to try. I never meant for things to get this bad, Michael. I regret everything." We agreed to meet at a neutral place, a small park where we could talk without distractions. When I saw her, she looked different, tired, worn down by the weight of her actions and their consequences. We sat on a bench, the awkward silence hanging between us. "Thank you for meeting me," I said finally. She nodded, her eyes filled with remorse. I know I hurt you deeply, Michael, and I don't expect forgiveness, but I appreciate the chance to talk. We spent hours discussing everything, our relationship, the betrayal, and the aftermath. It was painful, but also cathartic. By the end of our conversation, I felt a sense of release, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I'm not sure where we go from here, I said honestly, but I think this was a necessary step. Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. I agree. Maybe we can both start to heal now. As I walked away from that meeting, I felt a newfound sense of clarity. The aftermath of my actions had been tumultuous, but it had also led to growth and self-reflection. I realized that moving forward required more than just justice. It required compassion and the willingness to forgive. The road ahead was still uncertain, but I felt better equipped to navigate it. I had faced my internal struggle head-on, and while the scars of betrayal would always remain, I was determined to build a future defined not by revenge, but by resilience and hope.